oftentimes the narrative is those are alcoholic behaviors. No, the substance and the unmanageability around the substance, that's the alcoholism, but the behaviors are human behaviors. And so you could take any human behavior like manipulating, lying, cheating, stealing, and then you add in inebriation and chaos goes wild. And bad things, like Don was saying, happen. But the reason the stigma on top of just, propaganda and the way that even the government can get involved with these things gets so strong is because the cancer patient isn't going to sneak into your room while you're sleeping, take your keys, get in the car, go down to the store, buy the alcohol, then crash your car through a wall, throw your keys in the bush, and run halfway down the street and pass out. Hey guys, I'm Dr. Alan Hyde,
I'm Don Radin.
and we are here again for another week to talk about the wonderful world of the family disease of addiction. And as fitting as it might be, we are on the heels of getting news again of yet another ultra famous person passing away, only to find out that it was, in fact, substance use related. This isn't new. We get the news the other day. Panettiere, right? What's her name? She passed away due to complications of overdose on a substance, and it becomes a craze in the conversations. But as the news was first coming out, of course, that's not the first line of conversations, which we never really expect society to dive too deep into it. But we're going to have the conversations here, not about that actress and her journey. We're going to talk more about, kind of what the stigma looks like and why it exists the way it does. We're going to answer some questions that have come in before, specifically on the topics of stigma and why it's hard for society to embrace conversations around addiction and how to let go of these things and let people recover. But I would just share this kind of news when someone ultra famous or somebody impactful in society is impacted by the disease of addiction. It gives us an opportunity to break down these discussions and further understand. So if you tune along with us, Don and I are going to address some of these questions and see if we can't find some help for your understanding today. We can get into it.
Go to the first question.
Yeah.
Alrighty, why does the moral failing myth about addiction still stick around, even with all the brain science we have now?
This is so apropos. Before I don't know these questions, but a couple hours before this recording, I've been pondering this stigma thing. And for shameless plug, go to YouTube and search my name, Don Radon, Radon, because there's a TED Talk that specifically talks about stigma and breaking the stigma of addiction through community engagement. But this idea of, and it's simply misunderstanding and ignorance of the disease of addiction. It's been since, I believe, 1955, recognized as a disease and by the American Medical Association. And with the neuroscience that we have today, neural network mapping, etc., we've isolated at least that addiction and the disease of it occurs in the brain. And yet this misunderstanding is very similar to when a woman who would be single past a certain age would be considered a witch and then burned at the stake, or that leeches would cure illness, or that if you died early in life, it's because of, sin. These are, antiquated ideas. No one chooses cancer. It's not a choice. And if anyone who had it could just simply choose not to have it, they definitely wouldn't have it. So the stigma exists because of misunderstanding. There was a huge movement by the American government after they introduced a variety of drugs to the hippie movement because of Vietnam, and they didn't want these rebellions inside our country of America. So they started, not only did they introduce the movement to squash the hippie movement, but also to discredit them by the propaganda that was being pumped into the general public about drugs are bad, okay. And I'm not suggesting that they're good, they're killing people. But the misunderstanding that there's there's not some difference between people who use drugs and people who are addicted, people who drink too much and people who are alcoholic. And our whole society is based on, anti-drugs and this idea, this antiquated idea that people who do them are bad and that they just choose to be bad. And do bad things happen when you're under a substance? Absolutely. But this idea that, um, people choose to do this and die from it is really absurd.
Yeah, these are human behaviors. I spent some time even talking about this earlier today with some clients. It's oftentimes the narrative is those are alcoholic behaviors. No, the substance and the unmanageability around the substance, that's the alcoholism, but the behaviors are human behaviors. And so you could take any human behavior like manipulating, lying, cheating, stealing, and then you add in inebriation and chaos goes wild. And bad things, like Don was saying, happen. But the reason the stigma on top of just, propaganda and the way that even the government can get involved with these things gets so strong is because the cancer patient isn't going to sneak into your room while you're sleeping, take your keys, get in the car, go down to the store, buy the alcohol, then crash your car through a wall, throw your keys in the bush, and run halfway down the street and pass out. All right. And so we get really resentful about the behaviors that people are engaged in, even though as a human being, I'm just as susceptible or just as likely, if I'm not taking care of myself, to engage in behaviors that would cause other people to become resentful. We just point heavily to the destruction, right, to the chaos, and that's what we allow to baffle us, as opposed to the behaviors that are interpersonally causing conflict. And from there, anybody who isn't struggling with an unmanageable addiction, the conversation is always detachment. So the biggest issues in society, both when big groups of people are gathered or on Capitol Hill or in your family home, is individuals not detaching from the issue and trying to help, fix, and save when the other person on the side of the addiction isn't asking you to. They will be done when they're good and ready. Right? And good and ready also requires a spiritual solution, not a mommy solution, not a daddy solution, not a big bad politician solution, or a communal solution. All right. It starts with a spiritual solution. Then we can move into communal solutions. But the hope and the reason things like AA and 12 steps and NA work so well is because the community there doesn't force anybody to do anything. They present their experience, strength, and hope as a way of solution. And it's up to us individually to take what we like and leave the rest.
Let's take a look at question 2.
Why does society react to overdose like it's a scandal instead of a medical emergency?
Well, let me present it to you like this. I paused for a moment, but Socrates is famous for highlighting just really fundamental philosophies for human behavior. He says that in a society where individuals of low IQ and high IQ have the same voting power, it doesn't matter that democracy is the best version of government that we have. When low IQ and high IQ have the same power in voting, the spectacle always wins. This is a philosophical principle that's played itself out in major society after major society, that the spectacle is what wins out. What's the most glamorous or the biggest train wreck that we can feast our eyes on? And that's the focus. So, when you have something like an overdose of somebody famous, right? It's about the spectacle. It's not about what change could happen in order to make sure that Narcans are in places that people can obtain them. It's not about making sure that the drugs are safe by, being more shored up on our borders. All these are important conversations, and I'm not saying they don't happen. They do. There are politicians who do genuinely care. What I'm saying is that the spectacle is what people focus on, and I think the system supports that. You know, it's much easier to get people distracted towards things that don't matter than to make true change. Right? Change in a true sense is painful. Societies don't want pain, they want ease of access, and we live in a society that's ease of access. So the spectacles become enthralling. It's where we want to turn our attention. So when we get news, it blows up on social media and all the media platforms about a famous person overdosing. The first things you're not going to hear is about anything substance related. You're going to hear about, the relationships, and you're going to hear about, like, no one really understands why, and she had so much potential and all these things. The conversation is going to be the spectacle of who that person is, not what they were going through. And then by the time it is coming out about what happened, the story's already dead. The spectacle's over. Nobody wants to burden themselves with the truth. And I don't blame anybody for that. I spent a lot of years not wanting to be burdened by the truth. I spent a lot of years running from the truth. And so I don't present it as if, like, there's some high and mighty position of, like, don't lean into the spectacle. Just be aware of it, right? That maybe you don't want to be burdened by the truth. Maybe you don't care that that's what happened, uh, but it does matter. And it does matter that there are places like this where you can turn and get a breakdown, because the breakdown isn't going to happen everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. I kept thinking while you were talking about the disease model and how for years we were treating this, trying to treat the symptoms and not the actual organ that caused the symptoms, that had the defect to cause the symptoms. And once we had Louis Pasteur's disease model, life expectancy went almost up 40 years. And no longer, now there's some illnesses like the common cold where we treat the symptoms, but in an actual disease, we treat the organ. And diabetics used to die from diabetes at a very early age. Today, because we're treating the organ, they have longer to live because we're attacking attacking um, with insulin, which the body naturally produces, and it doesn't in diabetics. So now diabetics get to live longer. And so when we look at this from a macro view, um, those little details about relationships and whether mommy or daddy was good or bad. I've been in this industry for over 20 years, and what I have seen is people who come from highfalutin families and people from low income to poverty level incomes, people with education, people without education, all walks of life, sexual orientation, belief systems, faiths, all have the same thing in common, and that's the illness. And when we start looking about change with the illness and how we can um, have a little bit more grace and understanding for someone with the illness, then we can begin to create a movement that changes this view, this this stigmatic view of addiction.
Yeah, it's like your brain, if you've been using substances, maybe you're a family member listening to this and no one's ever told you that the brain rewires over time when you stop using substances. It's pretty clear to those who work with addicts and alcoholics behaviorally that you get years into them making a commitment to themselves that you start to see a completely different person. And the part of why that is so potent is because their brain is rewiring. And it's not just rewiring in spiritual senses, but it's rewiring into a place of maturity. They're learning better boundaries. They're learning better coping strategies. They're implementing more moralistic behaviors that their brain is more readily able to access. And it takes time. And part of the reason, even in the medical fraternity, that's a hard sell is because what we're positioning is, hey, if I told you that you're going to have to treat this person consistently for 3 years before you can trust that they've made a real change, uh, most doctors are going to say, I don't have time for that. That's starting at the top, the head of the snake, right? You're starting at the very top with the medical doctors, and they don't have that kind of time, right? So what it's actually then left to, the way it operates in our society, and I happen to be one, is that it lands on therapists and recovery coaches and recovery centers to behaviorally intervene. Okay, well, those things are all great and highly impactful, but the organ is what needs to be treated. And I'll tell you, I have a really, really good grasp and understanding of how the brain works and how to treat it in a therapeutic setting. But my expertise falls short compared to, let's say, a neurologist, all right? Someone who could spend and take the time, but they don't have that kind of time. So you may sit here and say, well, like, well, what time would they need to take? It's like, well, imagine we lived in a society where we could do regular brain scans in a way that doesn't tap somebody's insurance for the year completely to a point where they're out of money by the end of the year, just to make sure that we're tracking the progressions in a way that that individual can see it. All right. Behavioral modification is extremely beneficial when the individual can observe and see change. So, like when we implement a coping strategy and they can see that their hands have stopped shaking, right? They can see that their foot has stopped tapping, right? These visual observation cues are extremely powerful, and we have access to brain imaging. And there's some really, really good places that do it. One of the best is Amen clinics. You can go and pay, right? But that's a private pay. A lot of times they don't take insurance. It's not the most accessible. It's not a very accessible tool financially, mostly because doctors don't have the time to cover these things. But if we, hypothetically had a society where we could provide medical intervention on a week to week basis with visual cues, I think addicts would stand better chances with the highly resistant cases, like the extremely resistant cases. The ones that are ready, they take other visual cues, right? Namely, they observe other people who've gone before them, which is why AA is such a powerful tool, observation of community. So everybody wants to knock something like AA, right? Call it a cult, say that these people aren't figuring it out, blah, 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 blah. But millions of people have recovered in those rooms through a process only simply a part of it as observation. Yet we have access today to all kinds of different brain imaging technologies, and we don't use them because, well, our system and society is deemed we're not going to take that kind of time or put that kind of resource into this. Well, we put those resources in other places then. And I would say probably namely the morgue or treatment centers or prisons. And that's what we're left with. It's not all doom and gloom, but that's at a high clip of percentages what we're left with when we don't allocate resources properly to help people make changes with a disease. Because the conversation is it's not. It's not a disease. That's what people want to land on. Well, then we're stuck with the system the way it is.
Right. And ultimately there's no change. And we see our sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters dying of this illness and say, well, tisk tisk, they brought it on themselves. And what I've experienced is the impact of a spiritual solution actually helps expedite the change in the neuroscience. And that's been proven also. And they may not understand exactly why it works, but they know that it does work. And that's why places, my belief in places like mine, I believe that it's most imperative that we have a spiritual experience to see and experience that there is a God and we're not it, and that once that happens, someone's view of this earth, the people on it, the relationships, the interactions, uh, responsibilities changes, and someone will become different. There's so many examples over the history of mankind of where a person acted a certain way, had a spiritual experience, and then turned onto a new path. And that's exactly what my program with AA is principally based on is we have this spiritual experience and things change. That's why I also believe in long-term recovery solutions. Uh, my program's 90 days, but if I could keep someone, I'd rather have them for 6 months to lay that foundational work. Our 90-day program does work and we have very high success rates, but I'd love to be able to pour, the all of my experience from 1987 into the minds of and the experience of the men who come through my program for 6 months rather than trying to cram it in 90 days. But that's a hard sell this 6 months. Or, some of these programs, for people who can afford them are 2 years in length. I don't know. That seems a little excessive to me, but whatever works for our program, it's 90 days, and they start to begin to experience God. They begin to experience this desire for a new behavior, for new choices, for new ways of life. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous calls it a design for living. It's not for a design for staying sober. When I live in a spiritual mode of life, I don't want to get loaded. And there's a big difference between sobriety and recovery. And sober doesn't equal a changed life. It just means that they're not drinking and causing havoc, and chaos, but they're still the same person that they were before they got sober. Whereas someone who's recovered has a different experience, and they're not the same person. They're completely changed. I've watched people in my program lose 10 years on their face. They've dropped in age. I mean, their age is the same, but the wrinkles, the stress, the weathering of an addict's or an alcoholic's face begins to fade. And right before my eyes, I get to see dead men coming back to life. And it's because of a spiritual solution.
Yeah. It's why for generations we all know and sing a song called Amazing Grace. Pretty rotten dude at first. Before he wrote that song, smuggler, killed people, gets caught in a storm, has a spiritual experience, and writes one of the most impactful songs that our nation's ever known. That, oh, by the way, points to a higher power. And I pull no punches on this. It points directly to God. It points to a Christian sense of God. I'm never here with anybody in recovery to tell them how to define their God, but I share my experience. It's like, there is a God that loves you more than you can understand, who's paid a price for you that you can never repay, who's also told you that there's nothing you need to do to embrace it other than just live. Recovery is life, addiction is death. So what we're told to do in our recovery, whether we're the family member affected or the individual struggling with the substance, is to live. It's to live, not burdened by the disease of addiction, but unencumbered and free, lighter, to live in the truth that we're loved, accepted, and understood. And then we take that and we seek to understand. See, I don't go to recovery meetings to be understood. I go there to understand other people because it helps me live my life better when I can understand people. And wouldn't you know it, when you seek to understand people, they appreciate it. They want to be around you. They want to spend time. It fills your life up, right? Makes you lighter, helps you live a better life. This is what's happening every day with individuals who embrace recovery, who don't concern themselves with the stigma. They don't concern themselves with the way that society views it. And there's the movement. Well, here are the discussions on it. And if you're hearing this today, like we got a comment last week where I was talking about God, and the comment came through, and the gentleman was sharing, he was like, just 2 hours ago, I was thinking about going and picking up a drink. He says, this video pops up on my feed after I prayed, and you were here saying that we're loved by a power greater than ourselves, and I didn't go. I didn't go get a drink. I can't sit here and tell you, right, well, this is empirical, right? I don't know. That dude's out living his life, but he took a moment to share that, and I think he's really sharing it with you guys, that if you're struggling, God loves you. God will keep you. God will hold you, and you don't have to do this alone. And in that case, well, the stigma really doesn't matter in society at that point because you will have embraced the truth.
So true. There's an old adage that you'll hear in recovery rooms, and that is, what happens when you take a drunk horse thief and get him sober? We have a sober horse thief. If you take a drunk horse thief and he recovers from alcoholism, has an experience with God, they no longer steal horses and they live a free life and they don't have to take from other people. They get to give to other people and they're no longer selfish, they're selfless. Um, and one of the dogmatic things that I hear in 12-step meetings is, um, well, gosh, I just lost it again. This comes with age. At 56, I forget what I'm saying sometimes. Um,
The horse thief.
the horse, it's still not triggering. I can't do it. So let's move on to the next question because I'm literally gone on that one.
Why do people call harm reduction enabling instead of life saving?
Well, this, as far as I'm concerned, comes into extremism, where there's only one way. It's our way because it worked for us, and people are limited by the sum of their experience. So if it happened to them, then it should be that way for everyone else. And this is why we see a lot of the misunderstanding and ignorant comments on our page, is that because alcohol is just a substance to them and they can take it or leave it, then so can everybody else. And that's just ridiculous. That's the same person who says that depression doesn't exist because they don't have it, or any variety of mental health issues are just an escape, an out, a way for sympathy, etc. And that's just not true. Just because you're limited by the sum of your experience, it hasn't happened to you, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Um, and that's one of the things that we face is harm reduction. Look, it means that someone's life gets extended. They may not quit forever. They may be moderating or having someone moderate their substance use, but they've never made a decision that they want to quit for good and for all. And if that's the case, let's do what we can to extend someone's life. Let's do what we can to extend, if one of my children, God forbid, have alcoholism or addiction, and the chances are pretty high, 50%, due to genetic predisposition. And they decide that they're never going to quit. Well, I still want them on this earth breathing for as long as possible. I don't want to be burying one of my sons or daughters. Uh, and so harm reduction it took me a while also because I was an extreme hardcore 12 stepper and didn't believe in anything else. And as I have become more educated and I've seen it with my own eyes, the difference between harm reduction and enabling, they're not even remotely the same. They're not remotely the same. Um, Harm reduction enables someone, even though I just used the word enable, someone to live a longer life and a higher quality of life because they're not doing the substance at the rate that they used to. Um, Harm reduction models include pure, more regulated uh, drugs than what you find on the street, which you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah. I was joking around on this concept of harm reduction and enabling, fixing, helping, saving. Um, the reality is this is with all the humor included is addiction is on the rise because we don't live in caves anymore and no one gets eaten by bears. If that was still a thing, we'd have a lot less addicts running around, because wouldn't you know it, if life was more dangerous than it is now, it wouldn't just be the substances that would get you, right? It would be the elements, it would be the animals, it would be the predators, it would be the other unhinged people in the ways that it used to exist in lawless lands. And so we live in a much safer society, and God willing, because I'll plant this seed, right? It's like, sure, it's funny to think that because people aren't getting eaten by bears anymore, they're able to kind of wander on and stumble in their addictions. But the reverse is also true for me, is that if somebody told me that if we gave this person another year of life, it would give them another year of opportunities to finally get ready to accept God into their heart and therefore be saved, then I would say give them as many years as they need.
Mhm.
I don't care if it's on their deathbed that they get it. This is someone's soul that we're talking about. It's not just about their life, all right? This is about something deeper. And the reason a lot of times the statistics are 1 in 10 is because people don't want to embrace that. They've got some hurts, some pains. They think it's stupid. Sky daddy in the sky, right, isn't going to help me. This is made up. These are fables, myths, right? I'm going to be born, die, and be buried in the dirt, and that's the end of it. Until you experience it and you realize that this is so much more. It's so much more. There is something so much greater than we can understand going on. And if we could reduce the harm enough to give them just a little bit more time to embrace that, then I say give them all the time that they need. I used to be the guy that, like Don was saying, hardcore 12-stepper, like, why do we need Narcans in the grocery store? It's survival of the fittest. You want to be stupid enough, fuck around and find out. That's where I used to be. I was resentful. I was in a place of pain. I was burdened by resentment because people I loved didn't want to, quote unquote, figure it out. They weren't ready. Right? When I unburdened myself of the resentments, wouldn't you know, I viewed them as human beings, no different from me. They're no different from me. They are a human being. They have their own unique struggles, and they deserve as much time and dignity to sort it out for themselves. It's not up to me. That's our ultimate takeaway with a topic like this in society. It's not up to you. It's not up to me. I'm in the way. Right? If I start to decide that I know what's best and I know what's right, I'm getting directly in God's way of providing the solution. And damn it, wouldn't you know, I want to be in the way. So it's a daily pursuit for me to get out of the way. And I try to chase that down every day with prayer, with getting into proper action, by getting into proper attitude. I try to make sure I'm moving myself out of the way for God to do his work. All right. God's will be done, not mine, not my own, because my own would have me putting people in harm's way. Right? And the only thing that I would really enable is further stigma. Right? So wouldn't you know, when we step out of the way and let things like harm reduction take its place in society, people get more time to make better decisions. They're not all going to. All right. But even if this wasn't as big of an issue as it is, or let's just say we eradicated addiction completely, there are other issues in the world where people already don't make good decisions. So what are we talking about? Why are we so quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater? Why can't we give people more time? This is why people debate whether it's enabling or not. It's not survival of the fittest anymore. It's about fighting for people's souls. Believe it or not, that's where we're at.
Yeah. And I hear it all the time. You know, you've got to do it for yourself. And the truth is, I don't care what your motivation is to get sober. If you're doing it to save your marriage, that's enough to get started on this path. If you're doing it to uh, get your daughter back, like that's in 2006, before I found an actual 12-step experience, not by going to meetings, because going to meetings means going to meetings. Recovery is working the 12 steps, which leads you to have an experience with God. That you got to do it for the right reasons. Any reason that you try to get your life together by getting sober is a good enough reason. Um, these absolute extremist thoughts are honestly shutting the door on people to possibly have an experience that will change their life. So if harm reduction gets someone to open their mind and be willing to see that there is a better way than just harm reduction, they may stand a chance. Look at cancer. People still die of cancer today, and we have all these treatments. But if, you know, taking a certain treatment for cancer elongates someone's life, we're going to opt for that, and society will support that. Let's find different methods. Let's find different solutions. It doesn't mean that people won't still die of cancer. It means that they'll live longer, live and be able to experience more of what this world has to offer, and those who love them get to love them longer on this earth.
You know, a young man stands up in a 12-step meeting. He says, hey, stand up if there's nobody on this earth that you resent. And everybody in the room stands up except for one old man. All right, so the whole room's standing. Or this old man is the only one who stands up. Sorry, I got distracted. This old man is the only one who stands up. The guy says, there's nobody on this earth that you resent. And he says, well, I outlived all of them. You know, when we embrace recovery, we get to live long, happy lives. You know, I was a young man who grew up in the family disease of addiction. I never picked up the substances more than just like recreationally. I never suffered the unmanageable disease with the substance, but I was sick because I could not let go of resentment of others who were struggling with those things, and it made me sick. So if you're a family member listening to this, embrace it. Embrace recovery as well. It's not just up to our loved ones to find good reasons to be in a healthy position. It's up to us. The system has to change. You know, as much as I want to be the old man that stands up and tells that joke someday, I want to be the young man who can embrace the honesty that I have resentments and I work every day towards letting them go. I'd rather be that guy, right? I'd rather you guys be in that position because it leads to a better society. It leads to people that you want to engage with. So outlive them or not, you've got to do something with your resentments, or we end up having these discussions more and more and more. More people die, more spectacles, more confusion and baffling ideas about the disease of addiction, whether it's a disease or a choice. When we know for a fact that it's a disease, it's not refuted in the medical fraternity. It is embraced, studied, proven empirically. And the only times it ever gets debated is in social circles, right, or on the internet. And these are usually uneducated individuals. Even the professionals who debate these things, when I've sat down and had discussions with them, I ask them a very simple question. Can you recite to me the 12 steps? Very rarely will I sit down with a doctor who wants to debate whether or not this is a solution and they can actually recite them. And so my conversation is real simple. Until you understand both sides of the conversation, don't try to tell me that it's wrong. All right. We want to have depth understanding of these issues. I fully am willing and have sat down with the opposing view that it's not a spiritual malady. All right. And I've done my best to read the literature and be open to the conversations. When someone points to literature, I read it. I've never found any empirical proof that it's not a spiritual malady. But I have found proof through my own studies, my own reading, and others that when we work a spiritual solution, people's lives get better. And oh, by the way, not just for the addict, but for the family member. So that's an interesting component of this disease, is that people are affected and they get better too with this same process. Interesting. There must be something real there. So let's embrace it. Let's have the conversation. Let's not spin our wheels in this area when you come to our channel on whether or not the stigma is real or if addiction is real. It's real and it's a disease, and we don't get it twisted here.
Right. And if you don't believe that it's an illness, then why don't you investigate why don't you do your own research? Look for data, like actual data, instead of just standing on this, moral hilltop that because it doesn't happen to you, that it doesn't exist. So that means that, if you're not a pedophile, then really pedophiles they don't really exist. If you're not a thief, then people stealing doesn't exist. But that's ignorant. Um, so do your investigation. There's a quote that's associated with Herbert Spencer, even though there's no data to back it up. It's one of his ideas that was consolidated into a quote, but he didn't actually say the words. But the only bar against, or the only thing to make a person live in everlasting ignorance, that is a bar against all information, is ignorance and contempt prior to investigation. So investigate. If you really believe that you stand on your point without any data, then maybe you might want to investigate.
Yeah. Don't come at me, bro. But do come back. We love your engagement, whether you love us or hate us. We'll see you in the next one. See ya.
Peace.